A gate agent holds all the power, a flick of her wrist deciding if you make it home or are left stranded. But what happens when that power is twisted by prejudice? At New York's JFK Airport, Global Wings Air Gate agent Karen Miller saw a young black woman in sweats and made a snap judgment. She decided this passenger was a problem. In a shocking act of aggression, she ripped the woman's passport in two. What Karen didn't know was that she hadn't just stranded a passenger, she had assaulted a federal inspector in disguise, triggering an investigation that would bring an entire airline to its knees. This isn't just a story, it's a testament to the fact that karma, sometimes, is delivered at 30,000 feet. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a familiar, chaotic symphony. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, overcast day in Queens that promised rain but never delivered, leaving the city in a state of muggy anticipation. The cacophony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and anxious chatter was the soundtrack to 1,000 different journeys beginning or ending. For Dr. Ania Vance, it was the beginning of a crucial assignment, one she'd been preparing for meticulously for weeks. To anyone who glanced her way, she was just another traveler. She wore a simple gray sweatsuit, the kind designed for maximum comfort on a long-haul flight, her hair braided intricately and pulled back into a neat bun. A pair of non-prescription glasses sat on her nose, and she clutched a well-worn copy of a popular thriller. She looked like a college student heading off on a backpacking trip, unassuming and easily overlooked. That was precisely the point. Ania wasn't a student. She was one of the youngest, yet most respected, senior field inspectors for the Federal Aviation Administration. Her official title was long and cumbersome, but her job was simple in principle and complex in execution: ensure safety and compliance in the skies. This, however, was a different kind of mission. This was a ghost ride, an undercover operation prompted by a disturbing spike in passenger complaints against Global Wings Air. The complaints weren't about lost luggage or delayed flights. They were uglier, more insidious. They spoke of a pattern of discrimination, of passengers of color being unfairly targeted, reseated, deboarded, or subjected to humiliating and unwarranted scrutiny. The reports all seemed to emanate from a specific hub: JFK. Ania's mission was to experience the Global Wings air passenger journey firsthand, from check-in to landing, and to document any and all irregularities. She was a phantom, an observer, her true identity and purpose hidden beneath a carefully constructed civilian identity. Her flight was GW447 to London Heathrow. She approached the boarding gate, C32, where a small crowd had already begun to form. Behind the counter stood two agents, their blue and gold uniforms crisp and professional. One, a young man named Ben, seemed flustered but polite, managing a long line of passengers with questions about seat assignments. The other was a woman who appeared to be in her late 40s. Her name tag read Karen Miller. She had a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, an immaculately painted face, and a thin, tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She carried herself with an air of unassailable authority, the self-appointed queen of this small, carpeted kingdom. Ania watched her for a few minutes before joining the boarding line for Zone 3. Karen's interactions were a study in contrasts. With a white family, she was all saccharine sweetness, cooing over their baby and offering them pre-boarding with a theatrical wink. With an elderly Asian couple who struggled with their English, her patience was visibly thin, her voice becoming loud and slow, dripping with condescension as she gestured impatiently at their passports. Ania felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was the subtle, everyday poison of prejudice, so often dismissed as a misunderstanding or an overreaction. When it was Ania's turn, she stepped forward and handed her passport and boarding pass to Karen. "Good morning," Ania said, her voice pleasant and neutral. Karen Miller didn't return the greeting. Her eyes, a cold, pale blue, flickered over Ania's sweatsuit, lingered for a moment on her braids, and then finally dropped to the documents in her hand. She swiped the boarding pass. A beep, and then another. She frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket," Karen announced, her voice several decibels louder than necessary, drawing the attention of those nearby. "Oh?" Ania kept her tone even. I confirmed my seat just this morning. Is there an issue with the system? Karen tapped a few keys on her terminal with long manicured nails. The system is fine. It says here your ticket has been flagged for a secondary security screening. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over Ania again, this time with an unmistakable air of suspicion. You'll need to step aside. We have to call a supervisor and TSA. Anaya knew the procedure. A secondary security screening selection, SSS, was typically printed directly on the boarding pass. Hers was clean. This was a discretionary flag, one a gate agent could initiate if they had reasonable suspicion. I see, Ania said calmly. Can you tell me what the issue is? I went through the main security checkpoint without any problems. I don't have to tell you anything, Karen snapped, her thin smile vanishing completely. Airline security protocols are not up for debate with passengers. Now please, a step over there. She pointed to a sterile patch of wall away from the podium. You're holding up the line. The dismissal was sharp, public, and designed to humiliate. A few people in line shuffled their feet, avoiding eye contact. Ania felt the familiar sting, the hot flush of anger mixed with the cold resignation of being targeted. But she was not just any passenger. She took a slow, deliberate breath, reminding herself of the mission. She was here to observe, to document. This was exactly the kind of incident the reports had described. She gave a slight nod, her expression unreadable, and moved to the designated spot. The show, it seemed, was just beginning, and Karen Miller was its unwitting star. Ania stood against the wall, a silent observer to her own unfolding drama. She subtly pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll through social media. In reality, she was activating a specialized evidence-gathering app developed for FAA field agents. It recorded high-fidelity audio and allowed her to make time-stamped, encrypted notes. She typed discreetly, 10:15 a.m., Gate C32. Agent Karen Miller initiated discretionary SSS flag without cause. Verbally hostile. Public shaming tactic employed. Boarding continued. Zones 3 and 4 were called, and the line shuffled forward. Ben, the other agent, occasionally threw a sympathetic but powerless glance her way. Karen, however, seemed to feed on the attention her little display had created. She operated with a renewed sense of vigor, her voice sharp and commanding as she directed the river of passengers onto the jet bridge. She hadn't called a supervisor. She hadn't called the TSA. She had simply used the threat as a tool of control, a way to isolate and punish a passenger she had deemed undesirable. After the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, Karen finally turned her attention back to Ania. The gate area was now nearly empty, save for a few stragglers and a pilot in uniform who was standing near the desk, reviewing some paperwork. All right, Karen said, beckoning Ania forward with an impatient flick of her wrist. Let's see what this is all about. Ania walked back to the podium, her composure a stark contrast to the agent's simmering hostility. I'm still unclear on what the problem is, she stated, not as a question, but as a matter of fact. The problem, Karen said, leaning over the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is that your booking has irregularities. Your ticket was purchased last minute, with a one-way fare to London. That's a red flag. Ania's eyebrows rose slightly. This was a fabrication. Her ticket was a standard round trip booked 2 weeks in advance through the FAA's contracted travel agency. It was the standard protocol for undercover operations. Karen was either lying or grossly incompetent. I can assure you my ticket is a round-trip fare, booked well in advance, Ania said, her voice still steady. Perhaps you could double-check the record? She offered her passport again. My name is Dr. Ania Vance. The title seemed to agitate Karen further. Doctor? Of what? Weaving? She sneered, her eyes flicking to Ania's braids. The comment was so overtly racist, so dripping with venom, that it hung in the air for a moment, thick and suffocating. Ania's jaw tightened. The professional mask almost slipped. The insult was personal, sharp, and meant to wound. But she held on, her training kicking in. Document. Do not engage. Do not escalate. She made a new note on her phone. 10:35 a.m. Agent Miller made derogatory and racist comment regarding my hairstyle and professional title. I have a PhD in aeronautical engineering, Ania replied, her voice dangerously quiet. But that has no bearing on my status as a passenger. I just want to get on the flight I paid for. Could you please process my boarding pass? Karen's face flushed a blotchy red. She had been challenged, her authority questioned, by the very person she had sought to dominate. She snatched the passport from Ania's hand. It was a dark blue American passport, official and inviolable, a symbol of citizenship and the right to travel. Karen stared at the photo, then back at Ania, her lip curling in a sneer of disbelief. "This doesn't even look like you," she declared, holding it up as if it were a piece of trash. "It's a government-issued document. My face is right here. It's a perfect match," Ania said, her patience wearing thin. The pilot, a distinguished man with silvering hair named Captain Robert Henderson, who had been quietly observing, now stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, his voice calm but firm, "is there a problem here? We're on a tight schedule for pushback." Karen shot him a venomous look, furious at the interruption. "I am handling a security situation, Captain." "It doesn't look like a security situation. It looks like you're harassing a passenger," he countered, his gaze shifting to Ania with a hint of concern. This was the final straw for Karen Miller. Her authority had been challenged by her target and now by a flight captain. The carefully constructed facade of professional control shattered, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice beneath. A switch flipped in her eyes. In a moment of pure, unadulterated malice, she looked directly at Ania, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "You want to get on this flight?" she hissed. "You're not going anywhere?" And then she did the unthinkable. With a sharp, deliberate motion, Karen Miller gripped the photo page of Ania's United States passport. With her other hand, she tore it. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet gate area, a crisp, violent rip. "Reep!" She tore the page completely out of the binding, a ragged edge left behind. The biographical page, the one with Ania's photo, her name, her date of birth, the very essence of her legal identity for international travel, was now severed. Karen held the mangled page between her thumb and forefinger for a moment, her eyes blazing with a triumphant, hateful fire. Then she let it flutter to the floor. Time seemed to stop. Ania stared at the separated page of her passport lying on the generic airport carpet, the breath caught in her throat. This was no longer about a discretionary screening or a racist jibe. This was destruction of a federal document, a federal crime. This was an escalation so far beyond the pale that it changed everything. Captain Henderson's jaw dropped. "My God," he whispered, staring at Karen as if seeing a monster for the first time. "What did you just do?" Karen, seemingly realizing the magnitude of her action, took a half step back, her bravado faltering for the first time. But it was too late. The line had been crossed. Ania looked up from the floor, her eyes meeting Karen's. The calm, unassuming passenger was gone. In her place was something else entirely. Something cold, focused, and incredibly dangerous. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the airport and Captain Henderson's sharp, incredulous intake of breath. Karen Miller stood frozen, the torn passport book still in her hand, a flicker of panic finally dawning in her cold blue eyes. She had expected tears, shouting, a hysterical outburst that would justify her calling security and having Ania removed. She had expected to be vindicated in her cruelty. She did not get what she expected. Dr. Ania Vance did not cry. She did not scream. Her face, which had been a mask of stoic patience, morphed into something else. It was a chillingly serene focus, an unnerving stillness that was far more intimidating than any explosion of rage could ever be. The change was subtle but absolute. The slouch of a weary traveler straightened into the rigid posture of an official. The unassuming gaze sharpened into the penetrating stare of an investigator. Slowly, deliberately, Ania knelt down. Her movements were precise, economical. She picked up the severed passport page, handling it with the care of a forensic scientist recovering evidence from a crime scene. She examined the ragged, torn edge, her expression unreadable. Then she stood up, holding the two pieces of her destroyed identity. "Karen Miller," Ania said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it cut through the tension-filled air like a surgeon's scalpel. It was the first time she had used the agent's full name. At approximately 10:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, September 16th, 2025, you did knowingly and willfully mutilate, deface, and destroy a United States passport. Karen flinched as if struck. The recitation of the date and time, the use of legalistic language, it was jarring, unexpected. You were being uncooperative. Your document was suspect, she stammered, her voice a reedy, pathetic attempt to regain control. My document was a valid, government-issued passport, which you have just illegally destroyed, Ania continued in the same monotone. She held up her phone, which had been recording the entire exchange. The screen was visible, showing the active audio waveform. This entire interaction, including your racially motivated remarks and your subsequent criminal act, has been documented on a federally secured server. The blood drained from Karen's face. The mention of a federally secured server was what did it. That wasn't the language of an ordinary passenger. Captain Henderson, who had been watching with growing horror, finally found his voice. Karen, you need to call Richard Sterling, now. Richard Sterling was Global Wings Air's Vice President of East Coast Operations, a name known to every employee at the JFK hub. It was a name invoked only in the most dire of emergencies. I don't need to call anyone, Karen insisted, though her bravado was crumbling, revealing the terrified employee beneath. She was a security threat. She is not a security threat, Captain Henderson said, his voice laced with contempt. She is a passenger you have just assaulted. You've destroyed a federal document. Do you have any idea the kind of trouble you're in? The trouble you've put this airline in? Anya ignored their back and forth. She was in her element now. This was no longer a personal affront. It was a professional matter. She turned slightly, addressing Captain Henderson directly. Captain, may I have your name and employee ID number, please? She asked, her tone polite but firm. Of course, he said immediately, recognizing the shift in authority. Captain Robert Henderson, employee ID 75319. I witnessed the entire event. Agent Miller's behavior was unprovoked and completely unprofessional. Ania nodded, typing the information into her phone. 10:44 a.m. Witness, Captain Robert Henderson, GW employee 75319. Corroborates sequence of events. She then turned her steely gaze back to Karen. I will also need your employee ID number, Ms. Miller. You have no right to any of my information, Karen shrieked, her composure completely gone. She finally did what she should have done in the first place, but for all the wrong reasons. She reached for the phone at the service desk. I'm calling Port Authority Police. I'm reporting you for causing a disturbance. That's an excellent idea, Ania said with a chilling calm. Please do. Inform them they are needed at Gate C32, Terminal 4, to detain an airline employee for the violation of United States Code, Title 18, Section 1543, forgery or false use of passport. The specific citation, quoted verbatim from federal law, landed like a physical blow. Karen's hand trembled as she held the phone. Ben, the younger agent who had been hiding in the background, looked like he was about to be physically ill. Captain Henderson just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disbelief on his face. He looked at Ania, at her calm demeanor, her precise language, the way she was now methodically taking photos of the destroyed passport, the gate area, and a stunned Karen Miller. He was a man with 30 years of experience in the aviation industry, a man who had seen it all. But he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he was witnessing something he had never seen before. He was watching a gate agent's career, and quite possibly her life, implode in real time. And he had no idea who this young woman truly was, but he knew one thing for sure. She was not just a passenger. She was someone with authority, someone you did not, under any circumstances, cross. The arrival of the Port Authority Police Department officers was swift. 2 officers, a tall, stern-faced man named Officer O'Malley, and a younger, more observant woman, Officer Diaz, approached the gate with the cautious, world-weary gait of law enforcement accustomed to airport disputes. They had likely been called for a dozen similar incidents that week: irate passengers, ticketing arguments, drunken altercations. They were not prepared for what they found at gate C-32. They saw a gate agent, Karen Miller, looking pale and hysterical. They saw a senior airline captain, Robert Henderson, his face a grim mask of disapproval. And they saw a young black woman in a sweatsuit, standing with preternatural calm, holding the two pieces of a ripped U.S. passport. "What's the situation here?" Officer O'Malley asked, his voice a no-nonsense baritone. His eyes immediately fell on Anaya, the default target in any disruptive passenger call. Before Karen could launch into her frantic, self-serving narrative, Anaya spoke. "Good morning, officers. Thank you for your prompt arrival." Her voice was clear and professional, instantly commanding their attention. It was not the voice of a typical complainant. "This woman," Karen screeched, pointing a trembling finger at Anaya, "refused to comply with security protocols. She was belligerent, and her passport appeared fraudulent. I was forced to take action to prevent her from boarding." Officer Diaz looked from Karen to the destroyed document in Ania's hand. "Your action was to rip her passport?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Officers," Anaya said, taking a step forward, "my name is Dr. Anya Vance." She held up the two pieces of her passport so they could see the photo and the name. "This is my government-issued passport, which this Global Wings Air employee, Karen Miller, destroyed without cause approximately 10 minutes ago. I have a full audio recording of the incident, including her admission. I also have a witness, Captain Henderson." O'Malley's gaze shifted to the captain, a man whose uniform alone conferred a degree of credibility. "Captain, is this accurate?" "100% accurate, officer," Henderson confirmed, his voice firm. "I witnessed the entire exchange. The passenger was calm and cooperative. Agent Miller was hostile and unprofessional from the start. What she did to that passport was unbelievable. An assault." O'Malley and Diaz exchanged a look. This was already far from a routine passenger dispute. The willful destruction of a passport was a serious offense. "Ma'am," O'Malley said, turning back to Karen, "I need to see your ID, and you're going to have to come with us to the precinct office at the terminal." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Karen Miller. This wasn't going to be a simple report where the passenger was blamed and she was praised for her vigilance. The presence of the captain as a witness had changed the calculus. "This is ridiculous. I'm the one who called you. I am the victim here. She threatened me." "The only threat I made, Miss Miller," Anya interjected coolly, "was to inform you that you were violating federal law, a law you have now unequivocally broken." It was at that moment that two new figures arrived, moving briskly through the terminal. One was a harried-looking man in a rumpled suit, clearly a mid-level airport manager for Global Wings. The other was Richard Sterling, the vice president of operations. He was a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored Italian suit, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. Captain Henderson had clearly made the call. "What in God's name is going on here?" Sterling boomed, his voice echoing in the gate area. He ignored the police and Anaya, directing his glare straight at Karen. "Miller, my office got a call from Captain Henderson that you've lost your mind. Explain yourself." "Mr. Sterling, sir," Karen gasped, seeing him as a potential savior. "This passenger, she was a security risk. Her documents were fake. I had no choice." "Enough," Sterling snapped, cutting her off. He turned to Anaya, his expression shifting to one of strained corporate politeness. This was now a damage control situation. "Ma'am, I am Richard Sterling, Vice President for Global Wings Air. I am deeply sorry for any misunderstanding. Clearly, my employee has acted inappropriately. We will, of course, book you on the next available flight, first class, and offer you a full refund and a voucher for your trouble." He was trying to solve the problem the corporate way, with money and perks. He was treating her like a disgruntled customer. This was the moment Anaya had been waiting for. The moment the curtain would be pulled back, she looked from the frantic gate agent to the powerful executive, to the two Port Authority officers. She took a slow breath. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice taking on a new hard edge of officialdom. "That offer is appreciated, but wholly inadequate under the circumstances. You seem to be under the impression that I am merely an inconvenienced passenger." She reached into a small concealed pocket inside her jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She flipped it open. Inside, nestled in the leather, was not a driver's license, but a gleaming gold badge and an official credential. "My name is Dr. Annie Vance," she declared, her voice resonating with newfound power that made every person present stand a little straighter. "I am a senior inspector with the United States Federal Aviation Administration, Office of Audit and Evaluation. I am here undercover, investigating a statistically significant pattern of discriminatory practices and passenger mistreatment complaints filed against your airline, specifically originating from this hub." Silence. A thick, profound silence fell over Gate C-32. Richard Sterling's expensive tan seemed to evaporate, leaving his face a pasty, sickly white. The mid-level manager looked like he might faint. Officers O'Malley and Diaz stared, their eyes wide with understanding. Karen Miller simply gawked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. No sound coming out. Ania held up her badge for them all to see. "Your gate agent, Ms. Miller, has not inconvenienced a passenger. She has assaulted a federal agent in the commission of her duties. She has willfully destroyed a government document, which is a felony. And she has, in one breathtakingly unprofessional display, just become Exhibit A in my official investigation into Global Wings Air." She turned to the police officers. "Officers, I will not be pressing charges for assault at this time. However, the destruction of a federal passport is not my jurisdiction to forgive. That will be a matter for the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am, however, officially detaining this gate area as part of a federal investigation. Nothing is to be touched. I want the security camera footage from this entire section, from all angles for the last hour. I want employee logs, system logs from this terminal, and a full incident report from everyone involved." She looked at Richard Sterling, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Sterling, you are about to have a very, very bad day. I suggest you get your legal team on the phone. The FAA will be in touch." The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The unassuming girl in the sweatsuit now held the fate of everyone around her in the palm of her hand. For Karen Miller, the nightmare was just beginning. The immediate aftermath at Gate C-32 was a scene of controlled chaos. Officer O'Malley and Officer Diaz, their entire demeanor changed, secured the area, their professional respect for Anaya palpable. Karen Miller, now weeping silently, was escorted away not for a simple report, but for a formal interview with Port Authority detectives and soon federal agents who were already en route. The term felony hung in the air like a toxic fog. Richard Sterling, for his part, was a blur of frantic activity. His face, once a mask of corporate arrogance, was now slick with sweat. He made a flurry of calls, his voice a low, panicked hiss into his phone. He was speaking to the airline's chief legal counsel, the CEO, and the head of public relations. The phrase FAA inspector in disguise was repeated like a mantra of doom. Ania, meanwhile, was the calm center of the storm. She directed the preservation of evidence with the authority of a seasoned commander. She had Captain Henderson and the other agent, Ben, give their preliminary statements, her questions sharp and precise. Ben, trembling, confirmed that Karen had a history of being difficult with certain passengers and that she often bragged about her gut feelings for identifying trouble. Within 2 hours, Gate C-32 was no longer just an airport departure point. It was the epicenter of a full-blown federal investigation. FAA agents from the regional office arrived, their dark suits a stark contrast to the casual attire of the stranded passengers. They worked with Ania, collecting CCTV footage, downloading data from Karen's terminal, and formally interviewing a visibly shaken Richard Sterling. Ania's undercover mission had concluded with a bang, but her real work was just starting. The investigation now expanded exponentially. The incident with Karen Miller was no longer an isolated data point. It was the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of systemic issues at Global Wings Air. Over the next few weeks, Ania led a team of auditors and investigators in a top-to-bottom review of the airline's JFK operations. They didn't just look at official complaints, they dug deeper. They subpoenaed internal emails, employee chat logs, and HR records. What they found was horrifying. Karen Miller was not an anomaly. She was a symptom of a toxic corporate culture. The investigation uncovered an unofficial points system encouraged by mid-level managers, where gate agents were rewarded for proactive security measures. This vague directive was interpreted by many, like Karen, as a license to target anyone they deemed suspicious, a judgment that fell with staggering frequency on passengers of color, those with foreign-sounding names, or those dressed in non-traditional attire. They found emails from one manager, a man named Gregory Finch, praising Karen for her firm hand and for keeping the riffraff out of first class. They discovered chat logs where agents joked about random SSS selections for passengers wearing headscarves or speaking Arabic. They unearthed a dozen internal HR complaints filed against Karen Miller over the past 5 years for rude and discriminatory behavior, all of which had been dismissed by Finch with a note saying she was a dedicated employee who takes security seriously. Ania's team interviewed other Global Wings employees. Many spoke on the condition of anonymity, afraid of retaliation. They told stories of diversity and inclusion training that was treated as a joke, a box to be checked annually. They spoke of a culture of fear, where reporting a colleague like Karen would get you labeled as not a team player. Ben, the young agent from the gate, provided a crucial testimony detailing how Karen would often reassign minority families from seats with extra legroom to the back of the plane, claiming the seats were needed for passenger comfort, a euphemism for the comfort of white passengers who had complained. The investigation became a lead story on national news. The audio recording from Ania's phone, particularly the part where Karen sneered, "Doctor of what? Weaving?" followed by the sickening sound of the passport ripping, was leaked to the press. The public outcry was deafening. Flyer beware and Global Wings bigotry trended on social media for days. Passengers came forward with their own horror stories, creating a cascade of evidence against the airline. Celebrities and politicians condemned the company, and calls for a boycott grew. For Global Wings Air, the financial hemorrhaging began almost immediately. Their stock price plummeted by 30% in a single week, wiping out over $1 billion in market value. Corporate clients, sensitive to the public relations nightmare, began canceling their travel contracts. The airline was forced to issue a series of increasingly desperate public apologies, each one seen as too little, too late. Richard Sterling was placed on indefinite administrative leave, his career in tatters. His attempt to buy Ania's silence with a first-class ticket was ridiculed in the media as a perfect example of the company's clueless and insulting approach to a crisis rooted in deep-seated racism. Gregory Finch, the manager who had enabled Karen, was fired outright. Ania worked relentlessly, poring over data, conducting interviews, and compiling her report. This was no longer just about one gate agent's prejudice. It was about corporate malfeasance. It was about an airline that had fostered an environment where such prejudice could fester and flourish, valuing a twisted and discriminatory idea of security over the fundamental rights and dignity of its passengers. Her final report to the FAA board was over 500 pages long, a meticulous and damning indictment of an entire organization. The stage was set for karma to deliver its final, devastating blow. The day the FAA announced its findings was a day of reckoning for Global Wings Air. The press conference was held in Washington, D.C., and Ania Vance, no longer in disguise, stood beside the FAA administrator. Dressed in a sharp, professional suit, she was the embodiment of calm, unyielding authority. She laid out the results of her investigation with methodical precision, her voice even and clear. The FAA levied one of the largest fines in its history against Global Wings Air, a staggering $150 million. The fine was broken down into multiple violations. There was a penalty for the systemic failure to comply with federal non-discrimination statutes, specifically Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as it applies to air carriers. There were further penalties for inadequate training protocols, for fostering a hostile environment for passengers, and for failing to properly investigate and act upon numerous prior complaints. But the punishment didn't stop at a monetary figure. The FAA imposed a legally binding consent decree on the airline, a set of draconian measures designed to force radical change. Global Wings was required to hire an independent, court-appointed auditor to oversee its operations for the next 5 years. They were mandated to completely overhaul their employee training from the ground up, with a new curriculum designed and approved by the FAA and civil rights organizations. Every single one of their 50,000 employees, from the CEO down to the baggage handlers, would be required to complete it. Furthermore, a new anonymous and externally managed system for reporting discrimination had to be implemented, ensuring that no employee like Gregory Finch could ever bury complaints again. The CEO of Global Wings Air, a man named Arthur Pierce, was forced to make a televised public apology. It was not the slick, corporate speak statement they had issued before. This was a raw, humiliating admission of failure, delivered with the knowledge that his job and the very survival of his airline hung in the balance. The airline's reputation was in shambles, a case study in how not to handle a crisis. They would spend years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to rebuild the public's trust. For Karen Miller, the consequences were far more personal and devastating. Her life as she knew it was over. Global Wings Air had fired her for cause the day after the incident, leaving her without a severance package or any positive references. But her employment status was the least of her worries. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York formally charged her. The charge was not a misdemeanor. It was a felony. U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1543, which Ania had quoted at the gate, carries a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. The audio recording was the prosecution's star exhibit. Her racist comments, her blatant aggression, and the sound of the passport ripping sealed her fate. There was no defense. She couldn't claim she thought the passport was fake. Her own words revealed her motive was animus, not security. Her trial was short. Faced with overwhelming evidence and intense public scrutiny, she accepted a plea bargain. Karen Miller, the once powerful queen of Gate C-32, was sentenced to 3 years in a federal correctional facility. The image of her, stripped of her pristine uniform and immaculate makeup, weeping in a courtroom as the sentence was handed down, became a stark warning. The karma was absolute. In her attempt to strip a black woman of her dignity and freedom of movement, Karen had lost her own. Her desire to wield her petty power resulted in her complete and utter powerlessness before the federal justice system. She was no longer just unemployed. She was a convicted felon. Her name was now synonymous with corporate racism, a footnote in legal textbooks about the consequences of abusing authority. She would likely never find meaningful employment again. Captain Robert Henderson, on the other hand, was hailed as a hero. His willingness to step in and then cooperate fully with the investigation was publicly praised by the FAA. Global Wings Air, in a desperate attempt to generate some positive press, promoted him to a senior role in their pilot training division, specifically tasking him with helping to develop new modules on crew-passenger interaction and de-escalation. He became an internal advocate for change, using his position to ensure that the lessons from Gate C-32 were never forgotten. The hard, swift hand of justice had fallen, reshaping an entire company and irrevocably altering the lives of everyone involved. Years passed, but the story of Ania Vance and the gate agent at JFK became a piece of aviation industry lore, a cautionary tale whispered in training rooms and break rooms from Seattle to Miami. The incident at Gate C-32 was no longer just a news story, it was a catalyst. Dr. Ania Vance became a prominent figure within the FAA and the wider transportation sector. She was promoted to Deputy Director of the Office of Civil Rights, a position created in the wake of the Global Wings scandal. From this new platform, she spearheaded the most significant overhaul of passenger rights regulations in a generation. The Vance Mandate, as it was informally known, established clear, unambiguous rules for what constituted discriminatory behavior by airline staff. It mandated that all discretionary security flags, like the one Karen used, must be co-authorized by a supervisor and documented with a specific evidence-based reason. It also created a streamlined, fast-track process for passengers to file complaints directly with the FAA, ensuring they were investigated by a neutral federal body, not the airlines themselves. Her work had a ripple effect across the entire travel industry. Other airlines, terrified of a global wing situation, scrambled to proactively reform their own policies. They invested millions in new, substantive diversity and anti-bias training. They revised their customer service manuals, shifting the focus from absolute gate agent authority to passenger dignity and respect. The power dynamic at the boarding gate, while still present, was subtly rebalanced. A new level of accountability had been introduced. Anya often thought back to that day in Terminal 4. She remembered the sting of humiliation, the cold anger that had threatened to consume her. But she also remembered the moment her training took over, the moment she shifted from victim to investigator. It had reaffirmed her belief in the system, not that it was perfect, but that it could be forced to work when wielded with precision and determination. She never wanted anyone else to feel the way she had felt standing against that wall, singled out and debased because of the color of her skin. Her life's work was now dedicated to ensuring they wouldn't have to. Global Wings Air did survive, but it was a changed company. It emerged from its 5-year probationary period leaner, humbler, and by all accounts fairer. Its new leadership team actively recruited a more diverse workforce and genuinely embraced a culture of inclusion, not as a PR stunt, but as a core business imperative. They had learned their lesson in the most brutal way possible. The name Richard Sterling was never mentioned in their corporate headquarters again. As for Karen Miller, she was released from prison after serving 30 months of her sentence. She emerged into a world that had moved on. Her name was now infamous, a quick search online revealing the full, humiliating story. She moved to a small town in the Midwest, taking a menial job under a different name, living a life of quiet anonymity. The grand authority she once wielded over travelers was gone, replaced by the mundane reality of a life derailed by a single hateful act. There were no more crisp uniforms, no more power to decide who flew and who didn't. There was only the quiet, unending consequence of her actions. The story of Gate C-32 served as a potent reminder that integrity and prejudice are not abstract concepts. They have real-world consequences. It showed that one person, armed with the truth and the authority to expose it, can challenge a powerful corporation and force it to its knees. Ania Vance's quiet, determined stand didn't just get her on a flight. It changed the very air we travel in, making the skies a little safer and a lot more just for everyone. 2 years had passed. The name Karen Miller had faded from the headlines, becoming a trivia answer for those who followed aviation news closely. Global Wings Air was in the middle of a painful but ultimately successful rebranding, its commercials now featuring a diverse cast of smiling passengers and crew, a direct and costly response to the sins of its past. The world, it seemed, had moved on, but justice is not a destination, it is a process, and progress is always met with resistance. Dr. Ania Vance now occupied a corner office in the FAA's Washington, D.C. headquarters. The view of the city was panoramic, a landscape of power and politics. Her title, Deputy Director of the Office of Civil Rights, was one she had earned not just with her PhD, but with the courage she'd shown at Gate C-32. The Vance Mandate was her signature achievement, a robust set of regulations that had tangibly improved the travel experience for countless passengers. Complaint numbers for discriminatory incidents were down across the industry by nearly 60%. It was a victory, hard-won, and statistically verifiable. Lately, however, a shadow had begun to stretch across that victory. A powerful, well-funded lobbyist group, the Air Carrier Alliance, ACA, had launched a concerted campaign to dismantle the mandate. Their frontman was a man named Harrison Croft. Croft was the antithesis of Karen Miller. Where she was abrasive and transparent in her prejudice, he was polished, eloquent, and dangerously persuasive. He moved through the halls of Congress with an easy charm, his arguments cloaked in the reasonable language of economics and security. Ania watched him on a news program one evening, his silver hair and tailored suit catching the studio lights. The Vance Mandate, while well-intentioned, Croft said smoothly to the host, has placed an undue burden on our airlines. It has slowed the boarding process, increased costs that are inevitably passed to the consumer, and most critically, it has stripped our dedicated gate agents of the discretionary authority they need to ensure passenger safety. We cannot allow the criminal actions of one rogue employee 2 years ago to hamstring our entire national security infrastructure. Rogue employee. The phrase made Ania's blood run cold. Croft and the ACA were deliberately rewriting history. They were isolating Karen Miller, painting her as a singular, unpredictable monster. They were completely ignoring the systemic rot, the corporate culture of negligence and enabling that her investigation had uncovered. They were trying to erase the truth to save a few dollars on training and avoid a few minutes of delay at the gate. The ACA's campaign was gaining traction. They poured millions into lobbying efforts, funding sympathetic studies, and placing op-eds in major newspapers. The narrative was shifting. Ania started hearing whispers from congressional aides that the House Subcommittee on Aviation was considering hearings to review the efficacy and economic impact of the mandate. It was the first step toward gutting it. She knew she couldn't fight this battle with data alone. Croft was a master of public perception. He was selling a story. Ania needed to remind them of the truth of hers. She sat in her office late one night, the city lights twinkling below, and thought of the few allies she'd had on that terrible day. She thought of the man in the uniform who had stood up for her before he even knew who she was. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a year. Captain Henderson's phone. "Robert, it's Ania Vance." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end, then a warm, familiar voice. "Dr. Vance, it's good to hear from you. I hope you're doing well." "I am, thank you. And I hear you're running the whole pilot training program at Global now. Congratulations." "Trying my best to make sure we don't end up on your radar again," he said with a slight chuckle. "The new training is rigorous. The culture is better. You made a real difference here." "That's why I'm calling, Robert," Ania said, her tone growing serious. "That difference is under attack. Have you been following the ACA's campaign against the mandate?" A heavy sigh came through the phone. "I have. Harrison Croft. He's a snake oil salesman, twisting what happened to serve his clients. It's disgusting." "He's also effective," Ania countered. "He's managed to secure a hearing with the House Subcommittee next month. He's going to argue that Karen Miller was just a bad apple and that these regulations are an unnecessary overreaction. He's going to tell them that agents need more power, not less." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Robert, the data and the reports are on my side, but Croft will have airline executives and security consultants. I need a voice from the front lines, a voice of integrity that remembers what really happened that day. I need someone who can tell those politicians what it looks like when that discretionary authority is used as a weapon." She didn't have to ask directly. He understood. He would be putting his career on the line, publicly testifying against the prevailing interests of the powerful airline lobby. He would be positioning himself as an enemy of the ACA, and by extension, many powerful people in his own industry. "When I stood at that gate," Henderson said, his voice low and steady, "I saw an employee of my airline abuse a passenger. That's what I saw first. Before I knew who you were, I saw an injustice. That's not a complicated truth. These people like Croft, they want to complicate it, muddy the waters." "Yes, Ania. Of course, I'll testify. You just tell me when and where." A wave of relief washed over Ania. It was a crucial alliance renewed. The day of the hearing arrived. The room was packed with journalists, aides, and lobbyists. Harrison Croft was already there, holding court with a few members of the subcommittee, laughing and shaking hands. He was in his element. When Ania walked in, a hush fell over the room. She was no longer an anonymous passenger in a sweatsuit. She was a figure of authority, her name synonymous with one of the biggest airline scandals in recent memory. She took her seat at the witness table, her files arranged neatly before her. Across the aisle, she saw Captain Henderson, sitting in the front row of the public gallery. He was not in his pilot's uniform today, but in a simple dark suit. He caught her eye and gave a firm, reassuring nod. Harrison Croft took his seat. He gave Ania a brief, reptilian smile, a predator acknowledging its prey. The chairman banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "This hearing will come to order," the chairman announced. "Today, we will review the regulations commonly known as the Vance Mandate to assess their ongoing necessity and economic impact. Our first testimony will be from Mr. Harrison Croft of the Air Carrier Alliance." Croft leaned into the microphone, his polished voice filling the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 years ago, our industry was rightly horrified by the actions of a single, disturbed employee." Ania listened, her expression unreadable. The Battle of Gate C-32 was over, but the war for its meaning had just begun, and she was ready. The story of Dr. Ania Vance and Karen Miller is a powerful lesson in accountability. It's a stark reminder that in our world, a uniform or a title doesn't grant anyone the right to strip another person of their dignity. Ania's courage to not only endure, but to methodically dismantle a system of prejudice from the inside is a testament to true strength. This wasn't just about one racist gate agent. It was about ensuring that massive corporations are held responsible for the culture they create. It proves that one person, committed to justice, can truly make a difference, causing ripples that can change an entire industry. If this story of hard karma and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life stories, where the powerful are held accountable and justice is served.